Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from whichever part of the world you are watching from. And thank you so much for joining us today for this post-COP Activist Connect event, where we will be looking back at COP26 with young water and climate activists to answer the most fundamental question: has it been more blah, 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 or has actual progress been made? But now, before we start with that conversation, let's just also take a moment to acknowledge why it is important that we are gathered here today. Because with more than half of the world's population being under 30, the inclusion of young voices is more than ever a necessity rather than, as it is sometimes unjustly portrayed, a nice to have. And, this has been said at COP before, and it has been said very eloquently by David Attenborough during his speech, but perhaps the fact that the people most affected by climate change are no longer some imagined future generation, but young people alive today. Perhaps that will give the encouragement we need to rewrite our story, and as he said it so eloquently, to turn this tragedy into a triumph. And that's also where today's event comes in, because we will be listening to young climate and water voices on how we can move beyond the blah. And particularly when we speak about water for people, so the clean and safe water that people rely on to drink, the water that they wash themselves with, the water that they prepare their food with, we know that inaction is already causing detrimental effects to people who can't access it. Especially in this pandemic, I think we've all seen more clear than ever how a lack of water for people can cause disease, detriment, and in severe cases, even death. And that is why we have gathered here today, to explore that relation between climate on the one hand and water justice on the other hand. Because the biggest problem facing our world is, and including also achieving the sustainable development goals, those biggest problems can only be solved if we recognize how interconnected they are. So I would say no pressure at all for today's event. No, but for real, we're going to have a wonderful conversation all together, hopefully, which should almost feel like friends, sitting around the dinner table, enjoying a nice meal and having a nice conversation. Now, and I can imagine that at this point you might be thinking, friends, I don't even know who you are, weird lady on my screen saying all of this. I would say to that, fair point. So let me introduce myself as well. My name is Hajra Yacoubi. I'm 22. I'm a next generation keynote speaker and also a former United Nations youth representative for the Netherlands. But above all, and I mean, needless to say, I'm a very happy moderator because I get to host this session today with all of you. Now, during my time as a youth representative, I was able to visit my fair share of conferences, such as, for example, the UN Climate Action Summit, the General Assembly, and some other conferences. But there were always a couple of things I saw at these international gatherings and, these international discussions that honestly really baffled me. For starters, the work that still needs to be done when it comes to inclusivity. So that is about, representing and making space for voices from the global south, but also voices from young activists and young people, which unfortunately to this day still remain underrepresented. At the same time, that is also part of the reason why I am incredibly thrilled, and I mean incredibly excited, that for the event today, we will be able to listen to the amazing insights from young people from what I would call a nice spectrum of countries all over the world. Now, okay, you heard me mention it before, friends around the dinner table. You might be wondering, well, what are we going to have for dinner then? I'd say we have a super nice three-meal course. And for the first one, we will be starting by asking I would say the first course, starting the question about whether COP26 has been more blah, 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 or whether genuine progress has been made. We will have some expert testimony from our expert witness, the world's first water ambassador, Henk Ovink. And then afterwards, for our main course, we will ask the question, how can interconnectedness of the worlds of climate and water and sanitation come together? So when it comes to equality, can you even have one without the other? And finally, for dessert, we will ask ourselves, how can those campaigning for climate justice and the human rights to water and sanitation join together to move beyond the blah? I think I can speak for all of us when I say an exciting program, right? So I will no longer keep you in suspense, and I will start off by introducing our amazing, incredible, super humbly introduced lineup of guests. Because first off, we are more than honored to be joined by Valery Molay from Ireland, who is a climate justice activist at heart, a former UN Youth Delegate for Ireland, and who is the Climate Justice Officer for the National Youth Council of Ireland. Valery, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Nice.
I look forward to all this three-course meal and really getting into it.
Cool. That's amazing to hear. That's amazing to hear. Thank you so much. Now we're also joined by our next speaker, Shomi Hassan Chowdhury from Bangladesh, who is a multi-award winning water, sanitation and hygiene activist. She is co-founder of the youth-led NGO Awareness 360. She is Forbes 30 under 30 featured honoree for social impact. And honestly, you know, any incredible thing that is out there that you can possibly imagine anyone doing, Shomi's done it. So Shomi, I think it's only right to say that we're incredibly honored to have you in our midst as well today. Then let's see, we will have Gabriel Klaas as well from Cape Town in South Africa, who is an intersectional activist, youth coordinator for the African Climate Alliance, and also communications officer for Project 90 by 2030. Gabriel, thank you for being here with us as well.
Thanks so much for having me. It's going to be great. I think such a great topic and such a powerful, group of people. I can even see in the chat right now. So I look forward to it. Thank you.
Cool. That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Now, we also have Patience Agekum from Ghana, who is the lead policy team Strategic Youth Network for Development. And in this work, Patience really focuses and works hard to ensure that voices of young people are instilled in Ghana's climate change policies. So Patience, also for you, super big thank you for being here with us. Also, maybe good to mention for the people is that Patience, she is calling in from a place with a spotty network. So please bear with us. I think there's enough understanding that at times the connection might be bad, but we're doing our best to make it work as fluently as possible. Then,
hi, can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, Patience, we can hear you. Hey, it's great to have you here.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for the bad internet connection, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. It's actually really, it's quite clear right now. So that's great to see. And thank you for joining us, Patience. We're looking forward to it all. Okay, cool. So we're also joined by Srilekha Chakraborty from India, who is a gender rights activist with a focus on water, sanitation, hygiene, and sexual reproductive health and rights of marginalized tribal women and girls in India. Srilekha, thank you so much for joining us as well.
I'm super excited. It doesn't feel like it's like a virtual meal because we have been planning for so long, and I'm already hungry to have your 3-course meal. So yeah, let's do it.
Right. I honestly, for the people wondering, I seriously have like a bowl of cookies here in between. So also to everyone watching, get yourself a cup of tea, some coffee, something nice to nibble on, and make yourself as comfortable as possible. Because I can also imagine that talking about food is going to make everyone hungry. But no, thank you so much for that. I'm also looking forward to hearing from you. Okay, then we will also be joined by Desmond Alungwa from Ghana, who is co-founder of the Green Africa Youth Organization, youth advisor to the Global Center on Adaptation and Climate Program. And Desmond, we are super grateful that you are joining us here because we actually dialed you in on a super short notice as you are replacing Joshua Ponsam, who can unfortunately not be here with us due to personal reasons, but we are more than excited to have you with us in here.
Thank you very much, Haja. I can see we have almost 100 participants already waiting, so I wouldn't talk much.
Indeed. But thank you so much. And I think that just goes to show, everyone being here. I mean, being here is also deciding to say, this is an important topic. I want to be here and join in on the conversation. So completely agree. It's great to see our audience joining us in here as well. Now, for the event today, there will also be, we'll also have some special guest appearances by first off, Bonita Murungi, who is an Ugandan award-winning author and climate change activist. So we'll see more from Bonita later on in the event, to which we are super excited. He was briefly mentioned before, but we will also be joined by Henk Ovink, who is the Dutch Special Envoy for International Water Affairs, and he will join us in time. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I think, Desmond, you said it so eloquently, but thank you to the audience for being here as well. Once again, honestly, thank you so much for acknowledging the importance of this discussion. I'd say we're from different backgrounds, we're from different countries, organizations, but we're all united in, this hunger for positive action and making change. So that's something that already makes me really happy to see. Now, nice to know is that this event today is brought to you by IRC, which is why I would like to call Dee, our IRC representative, forward to give us some insights into who they are and what they do.
Hi guys, thanks Hajar. So how about a quick round of virtual applause for all of our wonderful speakers and moderator Hajar. Um, so it's really lovely to see all of this energy, to see all of this passion, to see all of this this great talent here with us today. So as you can tell from the long introductions by Hajar, everyone here is fighting the blah on a daily basis. They're action-packed and filled with a lot of things that they've done. And we are incredibly honored to have them here. And we want to thank them for putting time aside from their really busy schedules to be with us today. So thank you. So I'm Dee. I work for IRC. We're the ones that have put this together. And on behalf of the whole organization, I want to extend our warmest welcome. At IRC, our cause is to champion for the right for the right to safe water and sanitation, and we do so by strengthening the systems that support these services. But whether your issue is water or climate change, or even global health, creating a better future is in everyone's interests, and our struggles are connected and our actions need to be as well. So that's why events like today are so vital. It's about building new connections, exploring commonalities, and inspiring each other. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be a part of this event and to see you guys in action. And I want you guys to have fun. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Dee, and thank you also indeed to everyone, other speakers for the introduction. And I just saw that we have attendees from Malawi, Burkina Faso, Ghana, the United States, Uganda, the Netherlands, Ethiopia, South Africa, Mali. So I would say from a wide range of different places, for which we are super happy. And I'd say, today is not just about the speakers, but we also want to hear from you, the audience. Then we can hop in right into the first conversation, I'd say, which is reflections on COP26. Now, I would say this is going to be our first course here at the dinner table, because some of you were at COP and some of you were watching it from a distance at home. For example, I myself was not at COP, but I was tracking everything like a maniac on Twitter and on all the social medias. And also that goes for our speakers. Some of you were at COP, others were not, for the audience as well. So maybe can we just see a show of hands, a raise of digital hands, if you were present at COP or if you were watching it from afar and tracking it. Okay, I see Henk. Henk, you were present at COP. Let's see from our speakers as well. See some more. Desmond was at COP, Valery was at COP. Patience, and let us know in the chat as well if you were present there. But it's interesting to say, I think it's nice, right? We have a good division of people who were there and who were not. But I think in the end, we all care about climate and water and about making this work and bringing this forward. So super excited to see steps moving forward. Now, to those who have been at COP and to those who haven't been, we all know that a lot happened during the conference, right? I mean, so much has happened. We've seen incredible speeches. My personal favorite was the speech made by the Prime Minister of Barbados, but we also saw speeches by, for example, I also really liked the speech by the young Kenyan activist, Elizabeth Watuti. I don't know if you've seen it, but that was a really heartfelt one that I really liked. But we've also seen some other things happening, watered down language last minute, moving from phasing out coal to phasing down. We've seen young people outside the Glasgow venues striking and going on a climate strike. So a lot has happened. And after all that we've seen and heard, I'm curious to know from our panel, what has made you optimistic and what has made you outraged? So maybe show me, if I could start with you, COP, everything happening there. What were some things that, were you outraged about it? Were you optimistic?
Hi, Hajar. First of all, I hope I'm audible. Hello, everyone. I think I missed the intro session. Sorry about that. There was a sudden power cut in my end. But anyway, so I was not present in person at COP, unfortunately, but I did follow what was going on online. And I would say I was optimistic because the wash sector unfortunately has been neglected in global events, majority of them, right? Like we have seen it in a few months back, there was the UN Food System Summit. There was the Africa Climate Week, where we have seen there was a lack of attention to WASH. So in that sense, I think COP showed a ray of optimism for people in the water community, because there was an integration, significant integration of WASH into climate talks and pledges, which I thought was a success, because droughts, floods, and storms, like all of these, they affect water in 90% of extreme weather events, right? So I think it's important that we integrate those WASH conversations into climate, because water crisis is also a climate crisis. They're not like two separate things. So we need to understand that connection. So I think the COP was an important platform as it is. I think it was an important stepping stone in making that incorporation. And also, I really like the fact that there was a climate resilient WASH day that took place during the COP week. There was, for the first time ever, there was the Water and Climate Pavilion at the COP, which was also accessible both online and in person. I think that was really great. And there were a lot of topics that was explored in terms of like adaptation and mitigation and all that, and which are very much intricately linked to WASH. So I think that was really great. So yeah, I'm very optimistic.
That's amazing to hear. And that's interesting, the analysis you're making, that, before it was something that was very rarely talked about at these international gatherings, but yeah, as you called it, sort of a stepping stone of people now taking it up. Also, I see a comment in the chat, and I think indeed that's good to mention. Whenever you hear us saying WASH, you might be wondering, well, what is WASH exactly if you don't come from that background? But it stands for water, sanitation, and hygiene, for all those wondering. So it's really about water for people. And that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Shomi. And maybe Gabriel, if I can turn to you, do you agree with Shomi? Are you also mostly optimistic after COP?
I'm actually less optimistic than one would expect. I didn't attend COP in person, but I played sort of a home hub for the young people that are part of African Climate Alliance who went to COP in person. So every night at 11/12 p.m., I would sit waiting on my laptop. Everyone join a Zoom call, and it's like 9 o'clock there where they are, and we'd speak for an hour so they can debrief. And the problem that I found there was that there were two different COPs. There was the one that was happening on the outside and the one that's happening on the inside, and very different energies on both fronts. So I'm less optimistic when it comes to the one that was coming on the inside. But the build of movement that formed outside was one that kind of has made me not give up hope. I went on the Mentimeter. I said I'm at number 2 of pessimistic, optimistic. Just because I feel like watching that happen and watching that thing, watching that unfold on the outside was truly inspiring, because oftentimes we don't see that, and it's not really outspoken. And now that years later, this is, I think, we see this emergence of young people and from different backgrounds and generations as well coming together to speak out. It was quite inspiring, but I am a bit optimistic, I must say, because of the things I've heard from the inside, which I think I'll touch on a bit later. More blah blah, of course, but and tick box exercises, as they say. So while there are milestones, I'm worried.
That's so interesting to hear. And also, I find it so interesting how you put it, like that there were two COPs, one on the inside, one on the outside. Also, I was listening to someone the other day, and they actually said the same thing. They sort of compared it to, the tale of two cities, that you have like the people on the outside, for example, Greta Thunberg called COP, what did she say, a greenwashing festival for the global north, with more blah, blah, blah. So you see this sense of, greenwashing and distrust on the outside. And then on the inside, you see people working on these processes. It's interesting.
Conference of polluters was the words that were being used instead of, conference of the parties.
Right. Oh, wow. Another meaning to that abbreviation. Well, thank you for sharing, Gabriel. And who knows, maybe you'll change perspective. Maybe the others will change perspectives later on too. But what I do know is, Valery, you were also at COP, and I know you're a climate justice activist. We actually go way back in our times as youth representatives, and I know that you were always the type of person, you're inside these processes, talking to these politicians and government officials, but you're also one of the people who, is present at these strikes. So, you're sort of in the inside and in the outside. How do you look at COP? Are you optimistic?
how do I put it? Okay, so I'm going to use a term that was used by one of the leading scientists that was in the Irish delegation with us. He turned around to us at the end and he said, put it this way, COP was baby steps when we needed giant steps, you know? So think a baby walking, well, we needed a dinosaur to walk the earth instead. So I think that that's a nice way of capturing, without diminishing, the work that has also been done, but realizing that the work that had been done there, and the sort of conversation and the papers, and like you said, I have the privilege of being both inside and outside, you know, so I'm one of those people that spend time trying to move things in the inside, with realizing the difficulties that comes with that. But at the same time, I'm also the one that goes outside and also try to remind people outside of the reality of things and the complexity of things and how we can get it moving. But like you named in the beginning, Hajar, I am a climate justice activist. The reason why I don't say I'm a climate activist and I say I'm a climate justice activist is because I formally really strongly believe that the climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is a justice issue. And then for me, when we miss the inclusion of that justice lens in how we're responding to the climate crisis, it's a fail. So my disappointment with COP is the amount of days that I walked through those buildings, this conference building, and trying to find negotiators and all of this, we were still talking under business as usual. We're trying to find solution on the business of usual. And that can be sometimes disheartening, especially for young people. And I think one of the reasons, like you talked about it earlier on as well, where you said young people really want to participate and young people really want to bring about the change. And then one of the disappointing factor that I found is, yes, we are going to get that change, but the people that have a different vision will need to have the space to actually be able to bring about the vision on the table. And I thought we blocked using mechanism that we have always been doing, where we do not allow the sort of new conversation to come in. And then we shouldn't be surprised that we're still working with old tools. So when you're talking about the inside and outside COP, the two different COP. Like I went to one event outside where we unpacked degrowth, not necessarily saying that people loved the idea of degrowth, but at least we were able to talk about it. What are the pros and cons? How is it really going to work? And then I walked into actual COP when we were talking, there was no one wanting to even challenge the idea that, hey, would we need a new system to make this work? So for me, that's where the disappointment comes from. That's where my lack of optimism kind of comes in, is like, are we even like ready, open to dreaming of a different tool that might bring about the justice and the society that we want?
That's super interesting. I love how you said that. It really comes down to, like, you know, are we ready to bring about system change, or are we remaining on the surface of things that we're altering? And also super interesting point you made about indeed climate justice needing to be central. And correct me if I'm wrong, I do think as well, like the 100 billion, that it's delayed again for the loss and damage for the global south. So that's perhaps another example of work that still needs to be done when it comes to climate justice in that sense. Okay, thank you, Valery, for sharing that with us. Desmond, I saw at the beginning that you also raised your hand, that you were present at COP. Are you perhaps a bit more optimistic, or do you share maybe a little bit of the outrage that we have heard?
I am very optimistic. Well, not at the extreme, which is 5, but I chose 4 in the Mentimeter. And the reasons are that, like the first speakers have mentioned, this COP was the first one that we actually realized negotiators and parties using language that is favorable in terms of nature, in terms of water. And I think this doesn't happen often. This is hope. And so that gives me some kind of optimism. And then personal experience wise, I spoke in two events that had a very direct link with water. The first one was organized by the EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund. And this was tackling the cutting down of methane, which is more surrounding the connection between waste, climate, and water as well. And then the other one was also in the Resilience Lab, which was also focusing on gender and water as well. And usually, you see talks at really high level dialogues and other things, and then you find the difficulty of connecting those talks to reality. But this time around, these events I'm talking about, they shared stories, they open space for people who are practicing in communities to share their direct experiences with these communities. And people were sharing stories of how women have to walk far distances to carry water, how girls have to queue in places not being able to access water and it affecting their education. And I think when discussions like this start picking up, it sets an agenda that is an agenda of hope, and that hope makes me optimistic. Of course, this is not the optimism is not 100% being that it takes so much time between talks and practice to actually happen. Yeah. And I would only be very optimistic at the point where I see a movement being built in pursuit of allowing nature to regenerate itself as a climate solution, and making sure that everybody anywhere is having access to water, whatsoever purpose that is necessary for them.
Definitely, yeah, and that's super interesting. And indeed, as you said, it is true that nature-based solutions being mentioned, and even references to fossil fuels. That is sort of these new areas that we're touching upon within COP. And I liked the note that you ended on, Desmond. Also about bringing these topics together. You mentioned gender and water. We have an expert among us when it comes to gender rights and water, Srileka. I'm super curious to hear, after hearing Desmond, from your perspective and the water and sanitation work that you do that relates to women's rights and girls' rights. How do you look back at COP?
Okay, so I think I definitely second Desmond, and I have one thing that I've realized is that, and also you started sharing with this, is that we discussed about the jargons like phase out and then phase down. And then I was actually talking to adolescents and even women, and while even preparing for this talk today, I was talking to them, and I realized that, amidst all of this, what stood out for me was that the politics of language and who translates these to the grassroots or the most vulnerable communities. I work with the indigenous communities, with women over there, the one who fights always around the discourse of land, water, and forest, and who are actually taking the maximum brunt of bringing the water back to their home. And when I was discussing about COP26 and what's happening outside, it made me really think that in areas of poverty and hunger, how is this still a feminist issue? Is water still a feminist issue there? And how do we deconstruct these jargons, and make it more relevant? And how this changing dialogues even affects the last mile over there? So that's exactly what I've been also trying to find out the relevance in the indigenous communities where I work.
Yeah, definitely, and super clear indeed. I like how you sort of touch upon like a bottom-up approach, more so that is also necessary at the start. But that's interesting to hear. And Patience, who's also joining us, I'm curious, after hearing everyone, what sort of side would you more lean to? Patience, would you lean towards outrage or to optimism?
Okay. Hajar, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. So right from the beginning, after COP, I had a mixed feeling, a mixed reaction, and even up to this point, I still have that mixed reaction. And so I hope that after this session, hearing how we can all work together, I'll be optimistic about the outcome, because we all need that positive energy to be able to continue the work we are doing at the grassroots level, even at the international level. Because at COP26, like Gabrielle said, I was so much inspired by the number of people outside the building campaigning. I saw children, I saw grandparents, very good, but they were out in the cold campaigning, demanding for climate justice. And on the other hand, were the people in the room negotiating whether we should move phase out to phase down or phase down to phase out. So there was that. And I also saw a lot of gaps and opportunities in the sense that there were so many rooms where we're having conversations about resilience, building resilience beyond 2030. And I look in the rooms and I can't see any young person, and I'm like, what is happening here? So I see a huge opportunity for young people to be trained to understand these issues, to be able to come at the global level to also contribute to these issues, and gaps in the sense that, so I'll share a very interesting story. So after COP, a friend reached out to me from Sweden that, hey, patients, I'm a panelist for events. They are talking about water scarcity and all those issues, but I don't really know the connection between, because I've never seen a dried river, and I don't know how people are being affected by this issue. And I was thinking that, but there are so many activists in Ghana, in the global south, that are experiencing these issues, but they don't have the opportunity to share these stories for people to hear. So then it also takes me back to the point of the fight for climate justice, the fight for social justice. There's this inequality, and then how the people from the global south are affected. It cannot be compared to, or it's not the same as the way people from the global north are also being affected. So there's that gap, that even though there were a lot of young people at this year's COP, there was still a huge gap because the number of young people actually working on the grassroots in the global south were not more represented at the conversation. So I hope that after the conversation on how we can work together, both people from the global north and the global south, I'll be motivated. Thank you.
Thank you, Patience. And those are super interesting takes. I like how you started off by saying, that you had mixed reactions after COP, having seen everything. You mentioned being inspired by the people outside the venue, which is so cool to see. It's the same indeed, as Gabriel said, seeing children, but also older people, grandparents being there all together, united for climate action. But also indeed, the striking story that you shared, within COP, the event about resilience, but not a single person in the room. I think those of us who've been at these international conferences, and I mean as young activists who work in this field, I think that's something that we probably can all relate to. At least in my time when I was a youth delegate, and still, to this day, there's still a lot of work to do when it comes to youth representation. And then also we always say meaningful youth representation, because very often I see Valery nodding, so maybe she'll recognize this as well. But I've also been at events where, it's a 2-hour event, and then at the end, there's like a 2-minute speaking slot for the young people, and you have to get your points in there super quickly. And then at the end, there was this one event where this was the case, and then I went on Twitter afterwards, and I saw that the picture that they put up was the young people making their end remarks, and then the caption was, "We've listened to the voice of the youth." And then I'm like, no, you gave us 2 minutes out of the 2 hours, and we were not part of that negotiation and discussion. So I think definitely important points that you've raised there, Patience. Thank you for sharing. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I thought that was a really interesting first course, so to say, hearing all these insights from you. And I think, it might be a nice time during dinner time right now to invite a special guest to join us at the table. Henk, if you could turn on your video, I think the audience is super excited to see you and to have you be a part of this.
Hey,
Thank you
Hajar.
so much for being here, Henk.
Yeah, good to be with you. And it's amazing to hear the stories. And
Yeah.
I'm definitely old. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I was still going to introduce you. I had a joke about your age and everything.
Oh, yeah, well, go for it.
No, this is the best strategy. Put it out there before I get any chance to say anything about it. No, we're super happy to have you here, Henk, and especially to hear from your insights. I saw your hand raised at the beginning. You were also present at COP. So, and of course, being the first ambassador in the world on water, that's even more interesting to hear from you. But to the audience, we are joined by the Special Envoy for International Water Affairs, Henk Ovink. He's also Sherpa to the UN High-Level Panel on Water, and he co-authored the book Rebuild by Design, a transformative approach to climate change. That's a book about the American federal response in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. And maybe touching upon age difference, I was 12 when Hurricane Sandy came along. I don't know, how old were you back then, Henk?
2012, so that's 10 years ago, so I was 44.
Okay, that's
45. Actually.
35. Okay. Some age difference, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's all relative. As long as everyone's young at heart, I always say.
Yes.
Hey, Henk, you just mentioned you heard everyone say this, listening into what everyone said. I'm also actually really curious to hear from you. You know, you went to COP, you saw all these things. Are you more optimistic or more outraged after visiting the conference?
And I think this is the big challenge because it's a mix. And my outrage drives my optimism. So I think we want to change the world. Because if we look back in our past economies, that is not the example for how we want to see the future. Not in the way how we design our societies, you know, from an equity and inclusivity perspective, not in the way how we develop our industry, our economy, our infrastructure, in the way it's destroying our biodiversity, but also the environment for, you know, not good health, the relationship geopolitical between the global north and the south, but also on a smaller scale, conflicts, terrorism, and so forth. So the past is not a reference for the future. So that drives outrage, because everything you know that's replicated from the past to the future will turn the world in even a worse place. Then again, the optimism is that even though, and I heard there were 2 COPs, I think there were many COPs, actually much more than only 2. Within the different COPs, there was within the capacity within these different COPs, this urgency and trying to find an opportunity to deliver that change. Was it enough? No, never. And this is also in the assessment. You can say, is 1.5 degree off the table? No. Is it on the table? Nah, you know, also not yet. We're not there. So the optimism comes from the outrage that we're definitely not there, but the optimism also comes from that there's still this massive commitment to make it work. And I think even part of the you could say the more abstract part of the COP, the negotiations, the political debate, the talk about, which is different than talking with, and I heard that too, and this is always the case, but you can imagine that if you're not part of the conversation, but at least the concern of you is part of that conversation, it's better than nothing happens. So I'm not saying that this is the glass is half full. Here we have a big task ahead. And then on the 3 COPs, you know, I saw, I think, a dozen, but there were 3 at least. And one was the negotiations, and this is the in and out COP. The second was the COP of the coalitions. You could see a massive results and commitments from bigger and smaller groups that said, okay, these are the negotiations, but we want to deliver. We want to commit, and this could be private sector, NGOs, small and big across the world, that really committed together to say, okay, we're going to deliver on forest, on methane, on oceans, on water, on cities, on migration, and so forth. And I think if you add that all up, there comes, of course, my optimism. And the third was the smaller coalitions, which I got my real optimism from. People that we were able to bring to Glasgow online that are doing amazing stuff in the Philippines or in Peru or somewhere in Zambia, that really understand what's at stake, that bring everybody to the table, but we're also now to bring them at COP in the conversation thanks to the hybrid form. So many comes from COP, but I think to summarize it again, my outright rage drives my optimism.
I honestly, I really love that. My outrage drives my optimism. I'm going to remember it. I think it's really, really telling. And thank you so much for sharing that, Henk. And especially, you know, as you pointed it out, you know, even taking Gabriel's point further, there were more COPs, there were multiple going on. And it's interesting to hear where you gained your optimism from and where you gained a little maybe outrage from that ultimately also fuels you. Hey, at the very start, show me also shed some light, Henk, on, you know, that there were a lot of new steps moving forward, you know, when it comes to water. So she mentioned the water pavilion being there and WASH being more central. Do you sort of see a trend going on when it comes to water for people being more central?
Yeah, and I think that is that comes thanks to I think for one the people you now have gathered again and IRC, but also the many partners outside of that, is that We know water is central to sustainable development and climate action, but that often is perceived only as a very technical part, not policy, not politics, but also not activism. And we know that we have to turn it around, and having a water pavilion at the heart of the climate conference really worked. I was a little bit afraid when we started this. I thought this is going to be a water bubble inside a COP bubble. And before you know it, there's water people, perhaps young and old, talking to water people about the importance of water, and there's no rippling effect across. But luckily, my fear, anxiety turned into something that was very positive and optimistic, that we turned the pavilion really into a world where everybody could unite on the issues that related to water. So migration, food security, security in itself, health, climate action, resiliency, cities, youth, and so forth. So I think gender, WASH. And I think making those connections and showcasing best examples, practices, and coalitions, and then also driving towards a type of commitment where we could say, hey, but if you invest in water, you invest in every sustainable development goals. That's where the trickle-down effect is. You drive not only climate adaptation, but also mitigation in the context of sequestering carbon, biodiversity, and so forth. It really benefits a lot. And then to the point of resiliency, and this is also the part where you see a little bit of a lot of a difference. Climate change was always something of the future, and which was not the case, but in policy, it's tomorrow, the next generation, abstract, we can talk about this. Resiliency makes it very clear, and being it so high up on the agenda, that the world now agrees climate change is of yesterday and today and tomorrow. It is here, and the most vulnerable, being it people, but also looking at biodiversity and our environment, is hit hardest first and foremost. And the resiliency agenda, the adaptation agenda, helps drive that early action now. So I think that is definitely a change with this COP. Yeah. If you look back, that there acknowledgement that it is now, and also that with resiliency we accept that. An agreement on the adaptation goal, agreement on the resiliency funding, adaptation funding, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. So I think that and then the connection to water, 90% of adaptation is water. Without water, there is no way of talking about this. Yeah. We're in the midst of a pandemic. You can't talk about health without talking about water and access to wash across the board. So I think the awareness is there, the level of commitment is there, the scale and the impact is still lacking.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, those are super clear points. I also love how you said, that very often we refer to climate change as this distant thing. It's like the quote from David Attenborough at the start. He said this imagined future generation that's going to experience it, but it's already happening. It's, as you said, it's yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Hey, and Henk, you also mentioned the pavilion. People speaking about migration and water, about food security and water, cities and water, and also WASH. Can you maybe just very briefly, because I know there are some people probably also tuning in who are not per se from the water for people background. What do we actually mean when we say WASH and water for people? Could you give some examples very briefly as to what pertains to that?
Yeah, so let's start with the challenge. And it is 2022, which is actually, this is a shame. It should be the shame of the world, one of the many. Billions of people lack access to safe drinking water. And that means that they do not have that access. So to get that, they will have to do everything. Because without water, we die. Without water, there's no food, etc. So clean, safe drinking water without access means walking wells or being dependent on water that comes by trucks, often in very vague or illegal ways. You have to pay 5 or 50 times as much for the same amount of water that, in our homes just runs from a tap. It only makes the divide in the world bigger. So that is the W in WASH. hygiene, wash your hand. Didn't we all say, your brother, sister, presidents, CEOs, leaders, friends, whoever say, wash your hands. If you don't have the facilities to wash, then you do not have this first line of defense in the context of a pandemic like COVID or anything else. And again, billions around the world lack that access to hygiene facilities. And then sanitation, toilets in the smallest sense, but sanitation is the whole system that will make sure that we can take care of our waste. Billions of people around the most of a third of the world population do not have access to safe sanitation facilities. And that means that immediately impacts health and immediately cripples communities, but also has an impact on the environment. Now, with climate change, these challenges only become bigger. Climate change really is this big magnifying glass that drives the challenges of WASH, and therefore drives, in the context of the SDGs, inequality, migration because of food insecurity, girl and women rights and opportunities, because it is often women and kids that walk the wells for hours a day, and it's often the girls that are challenged because there are no hygiene facilities at their schools, so they become monthly dropouts and so forth. So WASH in the context of climate only is a bigger driver in the divide of the world. So we have to counter that, and investing in WASH helps develop opportunities for women and kids, secures access to schools, makes it possible for sustainable economies, circular economies, helps drive even carbon mitigation, climate mitigation, cutting down carbon footprint, and so forth, and so forth.
It's as you said, right? That it's like climate is water and water is climate. It all sort of interlinks, and it's actually
at a very individual level. And I think with WASH, we often think water is systems and individuals. It's everything, and the impact of WASH and climate on the individual level shows how important it is that we have to act at all these scales.
Thank you, Henk. And I see Shomi nodding, so I'm guessing there's going to be some vibrant discussion later on regarding this as well. Unfortunately, for this little segment, we are flying out of time, but that's always, it's the case, right? It's when your mom says dinner's ready, and then you always think that it's ready, but it's not on the table, but now it's actually on the table, and we have to go over to the second course. But Henk, I understand you will be back with us later, so we're looking forward to that as well. To continue.
Thanks, Hajar, and thanks everybody. Amazing.
Yes, thank you. Now back to our panelists, because I just said mom is calling. I'll be mom in this case, because the main course is on the table, and you can all turn your cameras on because we are starting this discussion. Henk actually made a perfect introduction for us already, speaking about the impact of water on climate. And for this main course, we really want to look at that relationship between climate on the one hand and water and sanitation for people on the other hand, and vice versa. Because as some of you might have noticed also in the audience, we have young water voices, but also young climate voices. So it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to hear from you about those interlinkages. And maybe I can just start after having heard Henk's remarks, his comments on COP. Is there maybe anyone who wants to comment on it? Maybe some reflections that you have? Gabriel, I see you raising your hand. Please do go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll make it quick, but I think a few points that was mentioned, throughout the rest of the conversation as well was something that really spoke to me was the definite need to disseminate information. Even the word disseminate is jargon in itself. Break down and really find a way to communicate the issue. And I think that's something that oftentimes is overlooked, and it's done for people rather than with people. And that's where the problem comes in. And then, of course, there was mention of, how nice the hybrid aspect of things were during COP, but oftentimes that's now viewed as cool, we've solved it. But me being pessimistic, I've got to mention the digital divide. Even today we're struggling with patients to get, connected. And then the mention of, the kind of inclusion aspect of things, and just in general, I've noticed a narrative being painted recently, and I kind of agree with it, is that, while most affected areas people are being included. So MAPA is being included, but mainly Africa I'm going to speak on. There's an aspect of, actually just saying that there's inclusion, but not really. And when there is inclusion, it's, we're viewed as needing saving, not worth engaging. And I think that's the most toxic narrative that is being painted. And so I think those are definitely aspects of COP that I first want to acknowledge that there are definitely more than 2 COPs. But I think those are the most important things I just want to bring out as we kind of move forward.
Definitely. So that's really about the inclusivity, right? I fully agree. I think also at some point I also saw that's maybe then more so financial inclusion, but I saw that a one-night stay in the area of Glasgow was like $1,600 for a night. That's also something you could argue on. How are people from different socioeconomic backgrounds going to pay that, apart from all the other, representation that you want to have? Maybe Valery for some last reflections on Henk. I see your hand raised.
Sorry. After years of Zoom and I still don't know how to take myself off mute. I mean, I think I wanted to reflect on the point that Henk just mentioned about the pavilion, when even the language that was used, actually, when he said, yes, when we put the pavilion of water, at first I was skeptic because I thought, oh, we're just going to create a bubble of water people. And then what ended up being was an opening up of a village. I like that term of the village again, right? So, I mean, this is it. Sometimes what we need is spaces to bring about or bubble spaces open up to the rest of the world for them to come in. And I bet you that the conversation that was happening in that pavilion didn't just stop in the regular conversation about water that water experts will talk about, because a person like me who's not a water person, I'll walk in and the first thing is I'll probably identify with a couple of stuff, but then I'll bring up a couple of stuff that I'm like, oh, I can add this on my agenda on the justice base, but it relates to this. But then I'm also taking away to my movement that water should really keep at the front. Unfortunately, again, and this is one thing that when I was having conversation with negotiators, COP is great in terms of bringing those pavilions, right? Because it brings about the conversation specifically with experts in those areas. But what saddens me once more, and this has to do with how we structure things and how we do the business as usual that I'm talking about, it goes beyond certain level of it, is how many negotiators actually had the time to walk around the pavilions? So they were negotiating, they were writing about what we need to be done, while actually conversation about the topics that will actually may change a person's mind was happening in this pavilion that they didn't even have a chance to. There was so many negotiators that I saw very wrecked, and I'll tell them, oh, I went to the pavilion, they were talking about the gender piece when it comes to climate finance, and I know you're negotiating about climate finance, and she's like, I would love to have heard it, but I don't have time to do that. So we're missing the point again, so then we shouldn't be surprised if we're not scheduling time to actually have those conversation, really expanding our knowledge and understanding so it can reflect on what the outcomes are at the end. It's problematic. So it's great the village is there, but if we're not getting all the villagers inside, so I just thought about it when Henk was talking.
Yeah, but that's interesting, because obviously, Valery, you come from a climate justice perspective, not per se the WASH space, but that's interesting, especially, right, to hear how what sort of obstacles you're now sort of seeing out there for people to get in touch with these bubbles that they're indeed perhaps not as familiar with. And as you said, if you can't get the villagers in the village, then that is a problem, right? I'm also curious because this is the big challenge, right? It's the $1 million question. How can we make sure that the climate world and the water world become more interlinked? I think that's what's central in this discussion for today. And maybe if I can ask you, Patience, because when you were talking in your reflections about COP, you especially mentioned how striking the representation, or I should say the underrepresentation of young people is. In your work, working on representation and inclusion, have you learned some things in that field that we can use in the specific context of how we can bring together water and climate that you perhaps want to share with us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
So I was happy when Henk mentioned that so we have challenges with wash, but also the climate crisis is making the issues. But even though it's not a very positive statement, I think it came at the right time for us to realize that into how the issues are interconnected. So I'll share a story once again because once you're an activist, you're on the ground, you get to experience some of these things. And also, not long ago, we witnessed a presentation from the Environmental Protection Agency in Ghana about drought and how river bodies and specific areas in the country, my country, Ghana, are drying up. And these issues lead to conflict because if you have people in a community and then they know that this is a river source where they get their source of water from, and then the next day due to the rising the temperatures and all is dried up, then they are forced to move to a different community to look for water, and that becomes an issue of conflict because they are the other community that they are moving to also depend on that kind of depend on the water. Even as we are experiencing these issues like experientially in our country, it's interesting to know that it is seen now that the civil society group that looks at water and sanitation issues are thinking about how they can relate climate change issues to water specifically. But interestingly, even though you don't see the action on the ground, when it comes to policy-wise, there are a lot of interconnections about water and climate change issues. Even Africa's Agenda 2063, which looks at Africa's global goal on how we can achieve the global goals together as a continent, looks at specifically water issues. I just want to read Ghana's report that was published not too long ago on how Ghana is doing 10 years after the implementation of Africa Agenda 2063, and then it states that the percentage of population with access to safely managed drinking water services improved from 33% in 2015 to 41% in 2020. And also, if you look at our nationally determined contribution, there are some specific actions under adaptation at the integrated water management system. So you look at the policies and you see all these interlinkages there, but actually when it comes to the ground, the implementation at the local level, or for the people to actually feel it, there's not that connection over there. And talking about representation, maybe when you get more people who are living these experiences, sharing about it, they will have more of these solutions to bring up than just the usual stuff that we talk about these global conversations at the global level.
That's super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that, Patience. And that's a striking story indeed, as you said, people having a lack of water in their own communities in Ghana, and they have to move to these different communities, but that leads up in tensions, because these communities are also dependent on the resources which are limited that they have for water. So it also goes to show, I think, how much broader it is. It also interlinks to security and other things. But I do find it interesting what you said, that on the local level, sort of this bottom-up approach and working together with civil society there is really important to make the connection between water and climate, because at least if I understood correctly from your perspective, that is not happening enough as of yet. So that's, I think, a good point. Show me, maybe if I can move to you, because I saw you nodding vigorously before. You're someone who works really in the hardcore wash sector, I think I could say. From your perspective, what do you think needs to be done, and what is something that we can do to make sure that we make that connection with climate and water in a better way?
Right, thank you, Hajar. I think what's important is to understand that we, whatever community we are representing, whether we are climate justice activists or water and sanitation and hygiene activists, wherever we are coming from, ultimately we need to work together. We cannot work in silo. Then we will not, none of us will achieve that ultimate target of sustainable development by 2030. That is just not going to happen. So it's really great that we're having this conversation here today, to at least understand how these things are very much interlinked. And something that really struck me as Henk was speaking is that climate change is not about the future, it's also about yesterday and today. So during this last COP, there was a big announcement, seemingly big announcement by US President Joe Biden, that there will be, he committed $3 billion towards adaptation. Now, this is a big commitment, yes, but is this big enough? Definitely not. right? So I think it's important to understand that it might seem big, like right now, but they also, like countries, just from stats, like the world's 20 richest countries account for 80% of global emission. And I come from Bangladesh, which is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. And we are the victims. We are facing the consequences of the actions of other countries, for example. So they need to also, when they're taking actions, they need to take bold moves that also highlight or compensate for what they have done in the past, for their inactions of the past. We can't just think that, okay, now we made a big announcement. It's not big enough because you haven't really made up for what you've already cost us in the past. So I think that's one thing to highlight. Secondly, I really liked how Henk focused on hygiene, like especially because my organization, Awareness 360, actually focuses more on sanitation and hygiene rather than water, actually, because when we talk about WASH, we mostly focus on water, but sanitation hygiene often gets missed out, even like by policymakers, by, we mostly talk about the hardware part of things, like how many toilets are there in that community, but that's not enough. Like the COVID-19 has shed a huge spotlight on our hygiene habit, or hand hygiene, for example. And what is also important is to focus on the software. And it's not just about education or knowing that, oh, I understand that it's important to wash hands in order to be safe. But it's also important to shift towards a behavioral change. Like when we are washing our hands, are we really following the right steps or not, right? So I think it's also important to focus on the hygiene aspect as well. And when we look into, for example, climate financing, we see that only like less than 1% goes to like water, sanitation, and hygiene related initiatives. And are those these big commitments, like these investments, are they really tracked well? Are they really is it monitored well? Like how are we measuring our impact? Where do this money actually go at the grassroots level? And I think, again, this gives me the opportunity to speak more about the representation of young people, the representation of grassroots organizations, who are the ones directly dealing with these people in the grassroots, right? Like, so they can come up with like the right solutions, the right ways to invest those money and to utilize those money. So I think it's really important to look into all of these from a holistic way, from a holistic point of view, rather than just seeing like WASH is separate, or even within WASH, like we only talk about water and not sanitation and hygiene. And of course, when it's about the linkage of climate crisis, and I mean, climate change is already having an impact. We are seeing this every single day. And that is worsening the water crisis. That is already like, endangering the lives, the health, the livelihood of like tens and thousands of people out there on the planet. So especially like post-COVID pandemic, like as I think if there was something good that came out of COVID-19, is the fact that it focused a lot of attention on WASH, which is great. Right. But that also brings me to a concern that once COVID is over, will people forget about WASH again? Will people go back to the normal, which is not the right normal? Right. So I think it's important to continue these practices that we have developed, the good practices through COVID-19, the lessons that we have learned, and to really implement those in our future actions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a super important point. And as you said, definitely as well, I would almost say the part of the WASH, the sanitation and hygiene being left out and forgotten very often. That's also what this is all about, right? Gabriel, I saw you nodding, I saw you engaging. So maybe do you want to put some reflections on how we can make this interlinkage in a better way?
Definitely. So in South Africa, we've experienced, I think, specifically in Cape Town, a few years ago, we experienced one of the worst droughts that we've ever had. We were 13 days away from having no water, and then the rain started. Many of us still have these meters that limit our water supply on our taps, despite the fact that it's the households that were needing it more and don't have the swimming pools that were being filled. And that was an aspect of it. But one thing that's important is that we call that the build up to day zero, because it was literally a countdown to day zero of our dams. But the reality is that before day zero, people were living like that before we even been aware of it. For like decades, people have been living in day zero before 2018 actually came about. Many of the young people that I work with and that, are part of the different movements that I'm in, are actually having to travel far distances. Water poverty is a massive issue, especially in South Africa, especially in Global South. And I don't think we acknowledge it as much as we should. It's not just a thing of, oh, there's no water. Oh, okay, cool. But girls are walking. Okay, that's a thing that's happening. It should be viewed as something that is so crucial to acknowledge and watch out for. That's why I'm quite, like I've been, over the last few months, falling more into the intersections of justice, trying to understand how things work. And that's why I quite enjoyed what Patience had said earlier, water justice and, the way that it associates itself when looking at social justice and how that equals climate justice and, in the broader sense, system change. But I like to view it as, something that we need to acknowledge. If we actually combat water poverty, we in actually fact, combat the social injustices that come with that. Many young people, predominantly young women and girls, have to travel far distances for water. Alongside that, not only comes, an aspect of dignity that is lost, an aspect of labor that is put forward onto young women and girls, but also gender-based violence, which I don't think many people talk about. South Africa is one of the, I think, the highest place for gender-based violence in South Africa. We are the capital for sexual assault in the world, and a lot of that is due to the fact that young girls and women are left vulnerable in communities, and a massive aspect of that is water poverty. So we need to acknowledge that as an issue. I think as I close this section is, I really appreciated seeing the conversation of how we need to look at water and, not just water, but sanitation and hygiene as an aspect as well. In the communities, just a few roads down, there are long drop toilets that haven't been sorted out since, apartheid in South Africa, which was 19 somethings. And so we haven't even acknowledged the fact that there are historical damages, that's why I circled it here, historical damages that have been put forward that have not yet been addressed, but we're thinking about how can we move forward? Okay, but look at the issues that have been left behind.
Wow.
Look at the people that have been left behind. And we need that justice. And I think out of COVID-19, not only do we need transformation, but we need an actual just recovery that puts people before anything else.
I love that. And it's striking. I mean, those are very serious numbers. Indeed, as you said, gender-based violence. And I think, I don't know if correct me if I'm wrong, Gabriel, but then what I'm also sort of getting from you guys is, the connection between climate and water, it might even be broader than just that, right? It's the connection between gender equality. It's the connection with, Patience also said it, security, lack of water leading to conflicts and all of that actually being brought together. Srileka, if I could turn to you, maybe also having heard Gabriel, you're also very predominantly working in the wash sector. Is there anything you think that is vital for us to know and add to the discussion to bring these worlds together?
It's so even before joining this discussion, because I was reading through all the profiles and they were like, oh my God, they're like super climate activists and like, walking with water. And I was thinking that I'm the person who has been working on gender, sexuality, and reproductive health, and what exactly will be my role over here. But then studying through, even like, listening to you all and even preparing in the course, I found out some really unsettling data. And as you actually pointed out, it's definitely a broader issue, like it is a feminist issue. If I talk about India, I mean, there's a saying that goes in one of the communities in India where I work, that on summer afternoon, people might even offer you food, but nobody will give you a glass of water. So it's like 7% of population in India, that's like 91 million people are without basic water supply. And this makes it like definitely a feminist issue, because as also Gabriel said, that women, especially in the rural areas, walk miles to collect water every day. And this is linked to not only their education, nutrition, and safety, but also to the age-old patriarchal norm of who's responsible for the daily work, and it adds up to the dialogue of unpaid labor for sure. But there's something also interesting that I want to add over here is that, and not only that, the unavailability of water in smaller hamlets of a state in India, suffering from extreme drought, has led to a new trend of polygamy that involves having more than one spouse to collect and fetch water from far. And there's a trend that's developed, and they are known as water wives. And hence it shows that how the interconnectedness of water and climate crisis adds up to the larger discourse of gender disparity and violence and the ongoing patriarchy. So yeah, that was something that I wanted to add.
That's super striking. I haven't, to be really honest, I've never heard of it before. Indeed, you know, the polygamy and the water wives indeed being introduced. But that just goes to show, I think, you know, yet another example of how intertwined everything in here is. And that's the sentence that you started with, Srileka, that on a summer day, people might give you a plate of food, but not a glass of water. Baffling indeed when you think about it. 91 million, also striking numbers. Desmond. You might have been listening to this, you know, you were at COP, the place where we're talking about climate, and you might have also noticed the lack, or maybe not a lack, of people talking about water. What do you think that we can do to bring these worlds closer together?
I think that we need to acknowledge the essential role that water plays. From all the conversation, we could see that the summation of all this is that water is life. And if I take it from Henk's submission, he says water is climate. We need to get to that point where it is acknowledged and it becomes an everyday language by everyone. If I use your example about such events where it's about 3 to 5 hours, and then they give maybe 15 minutes to a young person, and then that is a representation of all youth voices. We can use the same for water discussion, that there's not going to be such a one-time event where you can have all representations and all agendas having the same momentum. So therefore, we need to acknowledge the plurality of knowledge and the plurality of solutions, which is, if we make this a conversation by everyone, then we can have everyone talking about the same agenda anywhere, rather than waiting for everyone to speak about the same agenda in one event, which is not going to be a possible scenario for us in any future in the near. And I think the statement that Srileka just mentioned, it's an everyday situation in many parts of Africa. For example, in communities in northern Ghana, there were men that were actually demonstrating that they marry their wives, and after 5 weeks, they leave them. There's always a divorce here and there, because these wives are supposed to be carrying water, and the distance between the water source to the home is so far that when the woman marries you from a different community or cross community, where there is at least a better access to water, and now they have this experience, they cannot stay with you. It doesn't matter how much they love the man. They cannot cope with this. And that is a reality that people face. But then we need to make sure that these realities get to the mainstream, where everybody appreciate when they have water, and people appreciate what do we do to make sure that everybody has it. Because this information is not in the mainstream, because this information is not everybody's business. We see the same country where one part is suffering, and then another part is basically wasting water.
Yeah.
And so therefore, the one who is wasting water is basically not somebody who have the knowledge or the exposure to these situations elsewhere, and therefore is not contributing to the solution. How do you get all these people to go and pick up the center stage and talk about it, and talk about conservation of water, at the same time talk about protection of water? And I think that I'm stressing much more about making this agenda an everyday discussion by everyone, because the people that actually protect water, the people that actually support the systems that provide us with water, are the ordinary people, quote unquote, and not the few privileged super mechanics that sit in the meeting rooms. And so therefore, if we keep the conversation only in these high level meeting rooms, we might take a really long time to have a success.
Yeah, that's super striking. And Thank you so much for saying that, Desmond. I loved also how you said, these realities which you described, in northern Ghana, they need to be made mainstream. And, you touched upon some of the points that Shuleka mentioned. Shuleka, you mentioned that you were looking through everyone's bios. I also did a little stalking on you, and I saw that you also ran a project, where you made mural art about menstruation and access to water, sanitation, and health to really raise awareness and break taboos around it. So I think that also goes to show that there are a lot of creative ways in which we can get people, to talk about the interconnection that needs to be made. A lot of fascinating points that have been shared, everyone. The water inequity within countries, the effect it has on gender equality, how interconnected it is, not just climate and water, but it's also security, it's gender rights, it's so much more than that. And I also, coming back to the very first point that you also mentioned, Valerie, at COP, are we prioritizing it enough? If we're not freeing time for people to join in those other places, in these pavilions, these villages, as we called it, are we really then going to get out of these bubble and really get this interconnection? And I mean, especially in a time in which we've seen the importance of wash. I mean, Shomi, you mentioned it, COVID has really shown us the importance of sanitation, health, and water. But what happens after COVID? How do we move from there? We can't go back to normal. We've seen that, that's gonna have detrimental effects. So it's really about pushing it forward from here on out. Thank you guys so much for sharing that. I think it's time for a poet's take on this from the front line. So I am more than thrilled and more than excited to introduce the young Ugandan author, poet, and activist Bonita Murungi, who has pre-recorded a rendition just for us of her poem, I Can't Breathe.
Hello everyone, my name is Bonita Murungi. I am a 17-year-old and I go to Nabisunsa Girls School. First of all, I am very honored to be a part of this program. And one of the main reasons that I am so interested in climate change is because, first of all, it's more real than anything we could ever imagine. Hence why it is important for us to join our hands together and fight for a better cause. Well, as I recite for you this poem, I urge each and every one of you to be able to let your actions speak louder than your words as we hope and fight for a better tomorrow. I hope you enjoy this poem that I am about to present to you. I can't breathe. I can't breathe because of the injustice that my earth is facing. You see, it's funny, honestly. It's funny how you say you want to save humanity, but it is because of you her people are dying. It is because of you we are dying. Ever so slowly because of your lack to take action. I can't breathe. Because the system does not want to change, and yet you say you do not want climate change? It is you in your rundown car that produces smoke. It is your smoke that suffocates these my lungs. I can't breathe. We can't breathe because of your inadequacy to fight for climate change. But if we can't breathe, then why are you? Why are you hiding yourself from the effects? Take off your mask. Don't breathe. Don't breathe so that you can feel the way we feel with the rising temperatures and floods. Look at what our earth has become. Deny yourself oxygen. Deny yourself oxygen. I said, deny yourself oxygen for the carbon emissions that you have overlooked. If we can't breathe, then why are you?
Wow. Honestly, those are incredibly inspiring and heartfelt words. I think, yeah, we can definitely give a digital applause for Bonita. Bonita, Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think I can speak for everyone in thanking you and saying that it was heartfelt. Take off your masks to feel what we can feel. I think Bonita's poem really goes back to the essence of it all. It's about life and death that we're talking about, the ability to breathe and move forward from there. So thank you so much, Bonita, for that. Bonita is unfortunately not here with us as she had to attend school, which we completely understand, as schools had been closed for a long time in Uganda. But her family is here in the audience, and I can only imagine that you must be so proud. So thank you so much for being here and for showing your support by attending this. Thank you so much. Now, we've had these discussions, we've been speaking, about COP, our reflections on it. We spoke just now about how we can make that interlinkage between water and climate. And I think some summary points that we can get out of this up so far is, we've talked about the need for better communication. Desmond said, how do we bring these realities, how do we make them mainstream? We saw how we had to work together and not in silos. Valery mentioned very eloquently, if the villagers cannot visit the village, then how can we move forward from that? We've seen the importance that the pandemic has shown us, and especially also how this is such a feministic issue and how gender equality is so central in this. We've seen it. Water is life. 90% of all climate disasters are water related. So there is a great need for behavioral change, which brings me to this third conversations that we are going to have, which is about what can we do together moving forward. Now, I actually think I have a very simple question that I myself and IRC want to continue to work on and explore with you and the audience over the upcoming year in 2022. And that is to talk about the solution. What is the most important thing that we need to do to make genuine progress on water and climate justice? Now, I can imagine that my friends at the table, they've had their first course, they've had their main course, maybe they're getting their sugar rush a bit up high. So I'm gonna give you some time to think about your answer to that question, because in the meantime, we would love to hear about solutions from you as well, the audience. So yeah, so everyone in the audience, please fill out your answers. I see some things already coming in. Less carrot and more stick, action on the ground, fight, dream, listen to others, partnerships. We're just gonna keep it open and keep it running. In the meantime, I would like to go back to my dinner guests, my friends here at the table, to hear from them what they think and what they sort of envision as solutions moving forward. So maybe Gabriel, if I could start with you, I would love to hear from you. Maybe if you could very briefly mention some solutions you see moving forward that we can implement.
Definitely. Yeah, so I work in, as you know, climate communication as well as, socio-environmental communication. So one aspect that I really think needs to be looked at is the way that we portray the narrative. Oftentimes we view it as, things are, in silos, and I think it's time that we break that down. Too often are we carry on that legacy of things can be done alone, but in fact it shouldn't. And the way that we can change that narrative is through education, through our artivism, which is art and activism, through traditional and non-traditional methodologies. I think decolonizing the conversation is so essential as well. Too often do we go to people who aren't crucial to the conversation to ask them for their advice on something, and then we wonder why things don't work out for the most affected. I like to view it as as us needing to think of a four-way intersection, and different cars, but instead of cars, look at it as different waves of water. Because if things happen to crash with cars, they break. But with the waves of water, they look different because of when they splash towards each other, they kind of rebound. But at the end of the day, it's water, so it does intermingle. I think those are the different forms of justice and the different ways that we should view it. Is that at the end of the day, while it looks like it's crashing and while it looks like it might not know what's going on, it actually flows and it merges together. So we need to look at things differently. We need to break that old narrative that is, still sitting among us in our minds, and we need to really take charge of the way that we portray things and work things together.
Wow, I love that. Gabriel, you said artivism, activism, and art. Your way of phrasing that is a form of art in itself, seeing it as water merging together as opposed to, for example, cars colliding and, breaking apart. I honestly, I adore that. the way in which you said it. And maybe we are joined also once again by Henk. Henk, you've been listening in on this conversation, hearing many things. I'm curious to know from you as well, you know, being so centrally focused and working with water day in, day out, what do you think are some of the solutions we can use moving forward?
Yeah, first, I really would like to say to all what I've been listening to is in itself already spot on and inspirational. And I think this is where it starts. Too often, so one is, I think we have to start from a totally different foot, as we say. And what you all have been saying is the same, more or less. So too often in the past we are, and current, we're very reactive. So something happens and we look at it and we respond. And it leads to a band-aid approach, but it also is very reactive, coming from the past. And what I find often most problematic, that it starts with an answer, not with a question. So there's really not an interest in what's really at stake or who is challenged or who is it about and who are you? No, it's a typical, you know, single focus, solution-oriented, modernistic approach. Oh, let's solve this. Well, there is no salvation when it comes to SDGs or climate. It really demands, and that would be then second, not a reactive, but a proactive and then comprehensive approach. So we tend to break down our problems into silos and then develop solutions for the silos that become problems for the whole. So if you build if you have a problem going from A to B, don't build a road. Think about how you want to get from A to B. But we build a road, we get more cars and more carbon, we move people out of harm's way, we destroy biodiversity, we get more traffic, more pollution. And we think, oh, we have so many problems, let's make solutions for them. No, the first answer was not an answer to the problem. So I think one, proactive, not reactive, start with a question, not with an answer. Be comprehensive, have the guts to connect social, environmental, cultural, and economic needs and opportunities. Do not pick one SDG and say, hey, I'm a champion of number 6 or number 4. It doesn't work. Right. It's a failing approach. Then, and the other part is really about how. We have a clear tendency in our world, which is driven by finance and economy, to look at projects and solutions. And there's billions of dollars out there that go there. But if you want to invest in the people, you don't need billions. You need, the capacity, often only millions, to organize a process. And it's very hard. I find it harder to find $1 million to invest in capacity, education, people, than $1 billion for stupid infrastructure.
Right. Yeah.
This is not the world where we should. And to get there, and this is what I learned, you have to invest. You start to invest in the people by organizing. And from literature, I learned, I did not know this, I only learned it later after doing this, but they call it soft space. And I actually like the term. It is a space where you can build trust, where you can listen to each other, where you can help bridge the divide. Right. That is not the space where everybody needs to agree. No, we love that there are many voices from across the world in society. It's not that you make it gray, you encourage the amount of colors, but maybe you have it together.
Because I see some answers coming in the Mentimeter as well, which perfectly links, I think, upon what you're saying, bringing these voices together. I maybe want to ask Desmond, I don't know if you saw anything being shared in the Mentimeter that you also really agree with, that is a solution moving forward. Maybe if you could share briefly with us what you think is necessary for us to focus on.
I think I saw quite a lot, but then I think mainly for me, I think I would go with action and partnerships. That's one thing that strikes me, because there are people that will focus on policy, there are people that will focus on other things. But then for me, I think that for some of the work that I've seen and the work that Green Africa Youth Organization have done in the area of water started with partnership. And these are partnerships with really, really minimal capital. And at the end of the day, more partners are coming on board, and more partners are coming on board, and more partnerships you are forming, the more ideas that you are getting, the more innovation that comes in, and then the solution becomes more realistic and the people appreciate it. So I think that is one thing that really strikes me.
That's important, definitely. And I love how you said that, more people coming together. I do know that Show Me, in your case, also with your own organization, you guys started out really small, but you're already in what is it, 24, 23 plus countries in which you operate. Is that a solution that you also detect, finding partnerships?
100%, Hajar. I noticed that the first comment on Mentimeter was partnerships, and also Desmond and Henk mentioned about it. And I think SDG 17, number 17 exists because it is required in order to achieve the other 16 Sustainable Development Goals. Another point that also struck me from the Mentimeter is involving the community in water management resources. And I think it's not just in terms of water management, but the climate crisis, the whole wash. And that's exactly what we have been doing at Awareness 360 in all of our operating countries as well. It's important to take a human-centered approach because seemingly it might be seemingly appropriate to us from like afar, but it's really them who are suffering through these problems. It's important to engage them in the solution and make them not dependent on donors, on others, but really make them realize the long-term value of these solutions, of these problems even, like how can we go past that? For example, I really like how the conversation has went really dynamic, like beyond just water and climate, but also we talked about gender-based violence and a lot of other factors which are important, like access to education. I think it's also important to highlight how WASH is linked to extreme poverty, for example. Like if we invest in WASH, it's not just about, you're not dying early or you're not getting diarrhea or cholera. It's not about just being healthy, but it can also help communities come out of extreme poverty because of, the whole nation will be more productive. There will be reduced healthcare costs. And it's proven by research by WHO, for example, that the return of investment in WASH is actually fourfold.
Wow.
If we could, make the communities understand the long-term value of investing in WASH, they would be more willing to be a part of those solutions. I think it's important for us to also engage them at.
Definitely. And I mean, super clear. And that's actually, those are striking numbers, fourfold of return in WASH. That's striking to hear. Srileka, if I can turn to you, maybe you've also been reading the answers coming in via the Mentimeter. What are some solutions that you see?
Honestly, there's one thing that I'm constantly seeing over here is that, we need to step out from the boardrooms and to be with the community and to talk about, have more participation over there. But then I really want to say that this is really, like, I feel privileged because I think, and as you started the session with, like, this is not that we are getting the last 2 minutes of the conversation, like youth is not getting the 2 minutes of the conversation to talk, but it's the people who are working in the community, and I'm privileged to share the stage with them also. I think this kind of discussion and activism and giving more space is more important, where people who are working on ground gets the forefront and talks and come up with more ideas.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And indeed, I do fully agree. And I think that really sort of also brings down all these points that have been mentioned. Valery, have you seen anything? The Mentimeter is scrolling down. People are sending their input, for which thank you so much, everyone. Maybe something that has been said. What do you think is like our $1 million solution, perhaps, to move forward?
Yeah, I think the 1 million solution, I think one of the major things that we kept hearing while we're having the conversation was how water, climate, all of this is somehow linked to justice, and meaning that in our society we've lived a long enough time where we've left people behind because of the system we were chosen. So constantly I heard that people wanted to change the system. People said, we need another system, we need something new out there. And so for me, genuinely, to make a genuine difference in progress is, let's not be activists just in the outside, but let's bring that activism of we want something new. When we are in our places, like whether you are the engineer, whether you are like the nurses, whether you're the doctor, whether you're the politician, whether you're the young person invited in the room or not invited in the room. Let's keep that mindset of, I want to see something new on the table. Because something new will only come up when we decide to actually draw it out. And we all have different opportunities to do that, but it's about, let's not be comfortable within the system. But I wish, like, one last thing I'm going to say, it's especially for us in the West, it's the idea that who wants change in the world? I want change in the world, but who actually want to change? Then we will put our hands down because we don't want to feel uncomfortable and stuff. So let's be the people that will actually be like, who wants change? Me. And who want to change? Also
me.
Exactly.
Wow, I love that. I also saw Gabriel applauding for you. So that's just spot on, honestly, and something that I recognize, and I think many of us recognize in the work that we do. It sort of touches upon what Henk said, right? Also having the guts to be able to go out there and do this, included in your work. Now, for the sharp people among us, before we seated ourselves at the dinner table, before we had our first course even, we started off with a simple question. Are you outraged or optimistic with everything going on relating to water and climate? We saw that we were in a neutral middle, but after having heard from our amazing lineup of speakers, all these interesting insights, these heartfelt words, I want to call forward Dee again to see if we can, display that Mentimeter again. And I want to ask our amazing audience to please vote once more on whether you feel outraged or optimistic. So please go ahead.
Great. And to remind everyone, the previous score was 2.9. So let's see if anything's changed over the course of our conversation. So plug in your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. So a little bit more optimistic than last time. That's good. Last one.
Ooh, it's already way higher. 3.6. Okay. 3.7. Dee, what do you think? Can we leave it on, or can we? Oh no, wait, this is good because now it's at 3.8.
Some last minute scores. All right, guys, I think with that, we'll cap it off and we'll say that people have changed their opinions ever so slightly, and we are leaning towards the optimistic. So I'm really pleased to see that. And yeah, so you guys have influenced all of our speakers, and special guests have influenced our audience members. There's real change happening right now. So over to you, Hajar, then.
Thank you so much. And I definitely agree with what you said. I mean, great conversation and great dialogue is the spark of every change and every action that has ever happened. And I mean, this is indeed a real testimony to people, shifting and leaning more towards an optimistic side. Now, we have unfortunately almost reached the end of this event. As they say, time flies when you're learning interesting things, when you're having a nice dinner, a nice meal with everyone here at the table. But I want to say a huge word of thanks to our speakers. So to all the panelists, thank you so much for being here. Honestly, I really appreciated all your input. I hope you had a great time as well, being here with us.
Thank you, Hajar. And the team. Amazing.
Yes. And stay around, everyone, because we have some final words that we still want to share with you. Because, of course, the work does not end here. As we have seen and heard, I mean, one of the things we've really learned is that it's incredibly crucial to acknowledge the importance of interconnection. We saw that this is a feminist issue, but it's also about security. We've mentioned it before, water, climate, and that it all really relates to justice, as Valery said at the end. Now, if we are to solve the biggest problems that our world is facing today, we can only do that if we learn and connect with each other in a variety of ways. We can only then can we bring that message forward. So everyone that is watching here, if you're a climate activist, if you're an NGO worker, if you're a government official, or whatever you are, if you're out there, make sure that next time when you're, going about your advocacy, going about your day-to-day work, bring in water, bring in climate. If you work in a climate field, bring in a water perspective, bring in a WASH perspective, and vice versa as well. If you work within the WASH field, bring in a climate perspective. Those are little things that we can already do. So keep on spreading the word, because also interesting to know is that this event is one of the many initiatives that IRC is planning on hosting and organizing in the upcoming period. So stay tuned for that. And speaking of initiatives by IRC and speaking of connection, today we are also launching our Toilet Talk series, which is all about connection. So we're super excited about it. And that's why we will be ending today's event with the fun trailer of the show. So I just want to say one more time, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for our wonderful speakers for sharing everything in here. And thank you for being a part of this. We hope to see you soon. And in the meantime, enjoy the toilet talks.
We are the world.
Climate change is about climate justice.
I feel like right now in the world, and especially in some of the world leaders, we are dealing with a lot of toxic masculinity, if I could call it that.
And all these have inspired my drive towards every environmental work I do.
Betty, you're giving me goosebumps.
To know where you're heading to, you first have to know where you came from.
You're thinking it. Yes.
I think it's that sort of empathy that we need.
The problem is here, I don't have toilet rolls, I do have papers.
Well, the great thing about your advice in this show is that you just ask for it, so you get it. 3, 2, 1, flush it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have an amazing day, and then we see you next time. Bye-bye.
That was amazing. Bye, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Amazing.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Thanks so much.